Alright guys, so this second, or no, I guess it's the first video, the first and only video on this module is about quadratic formula, okay? Quadratic formula can be kind of challenging because it's a longer formula, but I promise once you practice it a little bit, it will get easier and easier to use. The nice part about it is it's a formula that you can always use and you'll always have on every test and quiz. I'll give you the quadratic formula, so you just have to know how to plug numbers into it and how to do it. Okay, so let's first just write down the formula. So it's x equals, it's a way of finding specific x values of quadratics when we can't factor. Okay, so x equals negative b plus or minus a big long square root of b squared minus 4ac, and then all of that stuff over 2a. Okay, so there's my formula. Okay, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so we have to make sense of what this a, b, and c stuff are. Okay, so how we identify it's always got to be 0 equals or equals 0 at the end, and then it goes in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So it's not always first, second, third. It's what it's beside. That's what matters. A is beside the x squared, b is beside the x, c is a number with no variable on it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do number 1 together. So we see it has an equal 0. So I can go ahead and identify a, b, and c. So a is the imaginary number next to x squared. That's a 1. B is the number next to x. That's negative 10. And c is a number back there with no variable. That's 16. Okay. So now let's go ahead and plug it into our formula. So x equals, go ahead and do negative b. So since b is negative 10, negative b is going to be a positive 10. I just flip the sign there. Plus or minus a big square root. B squared, let's go ahead and do that. So 10 squared is 100. Okay, I'm not going to do the minus 4ac in my head. So 4 times a is 1, times c is 16. All of that over, go ahead and do 2a. So 2 times 1 is 2. Alright, so now that I have it all in my formula, realize the only things that I've done so far are negative b. So you flip the sign of b and plug it in there. I went ahead and did b squared to get 100, and I went ahead and did 2a on bottom. So those are the three things that we do as we're plugging the numbers in. Okay, alright, so from there I need to figure out what's under this square root, what this number really is. And remember, PEMDAS, order of operations, tells me I need to multiply back here before I add or subtract anything up here. Okay, so let's get our calculators out, and let's go ahead and do this. So I have, yes, that is a negative 4. So negative 4 times a is 1 times c is 16 gives me negative 64 on my calculator. And then you'll notice that this number up here is always going to be positive. It always should be positive. So all I have to do once I get this number back here, I just add whatever this is to it. So in this case, I'm going to add 100 to it. And that's 36. So all this stuff back here is really just 36. Okay? So I have x equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 36 over 2. Okay? So then I can go ahead and take the square root. So the square root of 36 is 6. So now I have 10 plus or minus 6 over 2, right? Because I did the square root of 36 turned into just regular old 6. Now remember, just like with solving by square roots, when I see that plus or minus part, I have to do two equations with it. Okay, so I'm going to break this apart. 10 plus 6 over 2 and 10 minus 6 over 2. Okay, let's go ahead and pull over and finish those out. So 10 plus 6 on top is 12 divided by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 10 minus 6 on top is 4. And then 4 over 2 is 2. So my two answers are 6 and 2. Not too bad, right? I took up a lot of room, but not too bad. Okay, let's go down and do number 4. Okay, so the thing hopefully you are noticing about number 4 is that it is not equal to 0. Okay, so I need to make sure it's equal to 0 before I continue with this problem. So the easiest way, since I already have some stuff over on the left-hand side, I'm just going to add 13 over to this side. I'm not going to combine it with anything, it's just going to be there. So I have x squared plus 6x plus 13. Now, now this part equals 0, right, because that cancels out. So now I can go ahead and identify A is the 1 in front of x squared, B is the 6 in front of x, and C is the 13 without a variable. Alright, so now let's go and do our quadratic formula. So I have x equals negative b, so that's going to be negative 6 plus or minus the square root. B squared I can go ahead and do, so 6 squared is 36. Don't try to do the 4ac part in your head, so times 4 times a is 1 times c is 13. And all that stuff over 2 times a, which is just 2. Okay, so now get your calculator out. And I do my negative 4 times a is 1 times c is 13. Gives me negative 52. And then I'm going to add that front number up to it, so plus 36. So that's negative 16. So all this stuff is negative 16. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 all over 2. So go ahead and take the square root of negative 16, and hopefully, if you did it right, and you type the square root of negative 16, it should give you an error or tell you it can't do it. Okay, the reason that is an error is because we can never take the square root of a negative number. So if you are ever working through a problem and you see a negative under the square root like that, your answer is automatically no solution. Okay? Alright, so I did a couple problems for you. Let's do a couple on your own. So I want you to go ahead and let's just do 3 and 5. So let's scratch out 2 and, let's scratch out 2 and 5. Let's do 3 and 6 together with, or I guess go ahead and by yourself. So pause the video, do 3 and 6, and then you can unpause the video when you're ready for me to go through them. Okay, so looking at 3, it is equal to 0, so I can go ahead and identify A, B, and C. So A is the number in front of x squared, that's 3. B is the number in front of x, that's negative 1, right? There's always that imaginary 1 there. And C, the number back there with no variable on it, is negative 2. So, formula is x equals negative b. So since b is negative 1, negative b is going to be positive 1. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 1 squared is still 1. Minus 4 times a is 3 times c is negative 2. And all of that over 2 times a, so 2 times 3 is 6. So now let's go ahead and work out our square root. So grab your calculator. Negative 4 times a is 3 times c is negative 2. That should give you a positive 24. And then I add my 1 that's up front. So I get 25. So this stuff all back here is going to be 25. So now I have x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 6. Now I go ahead and take my square root, which is square root of 25 is 5, so 1 plus or minus 5 over 6. Now I break it into my two problems, 1 plus 5 over 6 and 1 minus 5 over 6. So now let's go ahead and work those two out. So 1 plus 5 is 6. Divided by 6 is just 1. 1 minus 5 is negative 4 over 6. When I reduce that fraction, I divide by 2 on top and bottom. I get negative 2 over 3. So positive 1 and negative 2 over 3 are my two answers there. And last but not least, let's go ahead down to number 6. So I notice that it's not equal to 0, so I need to make it equal to 0 first. So very simply, I get everything to the same side by subtracting 6 over here. So I have negative 4x squared plus 8x plus 6 equals 0. Now that I have it equal to 0, I can identify a, b, and c. A is in front of x squared, that's negative 4. B is in front of x, that's 8. C is a number all by itself, that's 6. So my formula, x equals negative b, so that's negative 8, plus or minus big square root, b squared, b squared, which is 8 squared, is 64, minus 4 times A is negative 4 times C is 6 all over 2A. So 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. So now I get my calculator out and do my square root part. All right, so what do we have here? Negative 4 times A, which is negative 4, times C, which is 6. So that gives me a positive 96. Don't forget to add that 64 on there, and I get 160. So this whole part right here is 160. Okay? So I have negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 160 over negative 8. Okay? Nice part here, we can just take the square root of 160. So let's go ahead and do that. Square root of 160 is going to be 12. Let's just round to one decimal place, 12.6. Okay, so let's call that 12.6. So now we have negative 8 plus or minus 12.6 over negative 8. All right, so now let's break it into our two problems here. Whoa. So one is going to be negative 8 plus 12.6 over negative 8. The other is going to be negative 8 minus 12.6 over negative 8. All right, let's do this here. Okay, so some more calculator work. So negative 8 plus 12.6, hit my equal sign, that's 4.6. Divide by negative 8. Hold on, I messed something up here, sorry. Negative 8 plus 12.6 gives me 4.6. Divide by negative 8. That gives me, let's round again, so that'd be negative 0.6. Okay. And then again, calculator work, negative 8 minus 12.6 is negative 20.6. Divided by negative 8 is 2.6. So we're always going to round to the nearest tenth here. Or sorry, that's the wrong spot. We're always going to round to the nearest tenth here when we're taking our decimal, our radical, and then we're going to round to the nearest tenth here. Okay, so negative 0.6 and positive 2.6 are my two answers there.